Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Aparuta de sangamatassa tawara. Ye sodavanta vamuntantu satang. So this afternoon, this opportunity to reflect on Dhamma, reality the way it is. And so this is our ability as human beings to reflect on the way it is. We can be the Bhutto, the watcher, rather than just the victim of habits, of karma. And that separates us from other animals who operate according to their karma, their forms, but don't reflect on them. But as human beings, like the word man itself, the English word man really means a thinking creature. Mano is from the Pali or Sanskrit word mano, mental, be able to create languages, thoughts. So this is also, it can be seen as a great gift, like the Buddha, the historical Buddha of ancient India, and it also can be a curse, because we can create a whole world of delusion with our thoughts. And that's why there's so much conflict in the world, because of our thinking, ability to think and create ideas, have views, have opinions. And of course, we're not going to always share the same views and opinions, because this thinking ability is a created ability. It's not natural. It's not like you're born thinking. We were none of us born thinking about anything. But we were born in the human form as a conscious being, as a human being that could be taught languages and educated to be reasonable, logical, or just be superstitious, caught in delusions that you acquire from your culture, your religion, your tribe, whatever. You acquire the kind of worldview that you get when you're an innocent child before you discriminate. So like with many of us, we were taught according to our parents about what's right and wrong, what's true and false, about religion, about political views, gender views. All these are views and opinions that have come into consciousness, but we're not born with them. So now is a time where there's so much conflict in the world because of the differing views and opinions. And some are very intelligent views. One can have very intelligent, reasonable views and opinions, and others can be very selfish and evil, destructive. But whatever the category is, that they're all views and opinions. Even the rational, reasonable, intelligent opinions are still phenomena that arises and ceases. And so the wisdom of the Buddha was pointing to the nature of phenomena, so that all phenomena is impermanent. Now that, when asked about wisdom, there's worldly wisdom, like how to survive in the society you're living in, how to survive in a marriage and a family, and all the crises, problems, earthquakes, fires that this planet that we depend on can produce. So there's a kind of worldly wisdom, acquired knowledge about how to survive streetwise, or intelligent, rational views about right and wrong and what's true and false. But in ultimate reality, there is no right and wrong, true and false. Virtue or vice. In ultimate reality, which is Dhamma, right and wrong, true and false cease. And that's Nirodha, the third noble truth, the end of suffering. So then the thinking mind can be quite upset by that kind of view, because virtue and vice, true and false, right and wrong are strongly grasped and held and believed in as absolutes. Absolute right, absolute evil. We absolutize the relevant, the impermanent conditions of our ideas and thoughts. So that kind of absolutizing, making like a righteous view, is a real divisive position to take on life. Many of us have experienced that in monastic life, people who are convinced they're absolutely right and that everyone who doesn't agree is wrong. And when you try to talk to them, give this kind of reflection, they just don't pick it up, because being right is so secure. Feeling I'm absolutely right is a sense of what we call narcissism, or sense of self-importance, because you believe in righteousness and that you are somebody who is right all the time, without taking into account the conditions that you're actually experiencing through your body, through your senses. So that's where all conditions are impermanent is so important, is not a worldly wise teaching, it's pure wisdom, unadulterated universal wisdom. It's an investigation of right and wrong, all our conditioning, whether it's good or bad, right or wrong, true or false, male or female. Because whatever is conditioned is impermanent. So like a condition, a sankhara, a phenomenon, they are impermanent. And then you're encouraged to observe that for yourself, not just grasp the statement of the Buddha. But the whole point of bhavana or meditation is to see for yourself the impermanence, the ephemeral nature of righteousness, of wrongness, of views and opinions, good or bad, true or false. So how do we do that if we are grasping our view as right and don't listen to anyone else? We just consider everyone else wrong. Or it can go the opposite. We see ourselves as a sinner, someone who's wrong, who's abused, who's committed crimes, who's done bad deeds, told lies, deluded people. And then we think of ourselves as a criminal. Now that's not a very nice way to see oneself, as a criminal. Though according to worldly wisdom, you may be a criminal. But just the word criminal is a phenomenon that arises and ceases. And we can grasp that. We can go through our life when we've committed crimes, told lies when we were young, and still, before we pass away at 100, we still think of ourselves as a criminal. If we don't see and don't investigate this grasping tendency to hold to what is unstable and impermanent. This is a very interesting time to live when I look at my life, and now the conditions, say from my youthful years to the present day, have changed considerably. And so, all that is history now. I have photo albums of when I was a little child, when I was a teenager. And so what are these photographs of oneself when one was 4 years old or 15 years old? They are like ghosts or memories of the past, printed onto a paper or in an iPad or an iPhone. Is that really me? Is that picture of this 4-year-old boy really me? And according to the identity with my body, that was me at 4 years old. But all that, the sense of that was me when I was 4 years old, is a creation of thoughts. If you don't think, then you can't create identities with photographs of yourself. So what is the ultimate reality in comparison? What are we working for? What did the Buddha point to in his teaching? What was this is so important in this time to realize that this teaching of the Buddha, Gautama the Buddha of ancient India, that it's not about ancient Indian culture. It's about here and now, about the human condition that we all share. whether you're a criminal or a saint, we share the same experience of life through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. The differences come through what we call karma, the DNA of our mother and father, our social background, our education, our age. But these are all changing conditions. They're all sankharas. They're all phenomena. And then to see phenomena as impermanent, you can't just grasp the words, even though it's a wise teaching. It's not wisdom in itself, it's pointing to investigation. This is what bhavana or meditation is to investigate. Can you find a condition that's permanent? Now, if you're really stubborn and determined to be righteous and hold to your opinion no matter what the cost, then you think being right is permanent. Right is right. Right is good. And that's true. Right is good, but it's not permanent. So, in this position of Buddha knowing Dhamma, this configuration of the witness, the Buddha, the Buddho, is a witness position. And that's what we encourage you all to do, is take the Buddho witness position of being the observer of the rising and ceasing of thoughts, of emotions, right or wrong, good or bad, without judging them. Because as soon as you judge, you have a bad thought, and you say, that's a bad thought, you've made it more than what it is. It's a phenomena that arises and ceases through witnessing its absence, because whatever arises ceases. And the Dhamma is apparent here and now. So it's not something remote or something you as a person ever get hold of. You can't grasp Dhamma. You can grasp Dhamma teachings, you can memorize the Tripitaka, but that kind of grasping is grasping something good, yes, but it's still grasping. It's not bhavana. It's not investigating the way it is. All conditions, all phenomena are impermanent. So this word impermanent, anicca, in Pali we use that in this tradition. Sape sankhara anicca. That's what Dhamma wisdom is. It's not grasping that statement, but bhavana is investigating. Is that true or false? And if we're devoted Buddhists, we think, well, the Buddha said it's true, so we must believe that if we're Buddhists. So we take another position of being a Buddhist who believes everything in the scriptures. So that's the form, grasping the form of what we now call Theravada Buddhism, Pali tradition, Thai tradition. And it is, all these things in themselves are, quite admirable, but they're still phenomena, and that's their very nature. They can arise and cease. Buddhism as a condition can come and go, but Dhamma doesn't come and go. So what is Dhamma? what is the Dhamma in terms of apparent here and now? What is Nibbana that is apparent here and now? Because this word nirvana or nibbana is a high-minded word. You know, it's a goal to attain nibbana, to realize Dhamma. And so these are ceremonies we take. We give the refuges, the precepts, and we have meditation classes, and we encourage people to bhavana, to meditate. But oftentimes we're just conditioning them to think like a Buddhist, become a Buddhist. Rather than actually realizing the ultimate nature the Buddha was pointing to, the Dhamma, which is apparent here and now, something that you don't have to look for. You can't find the Dhamma. Has no objective presence. You can't see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it, or think it. And the word Dhamma is another word, another sankhara, another phenomenon. So taking refuge in a phenomenon is not a real refuge. Because Buddhists become disillusioned. They say, I've tried Buddhism, but it didn't get me anywhere, and I've heard those refrains. Because they grasp the teachings or the meditation techniques without investigating that all that they're grasping is impermanent, unstable. So they're looking for stability in Dhamma through grasping the word Dhamma or Buddhism. So in Buddha's awakening teaching, it's to wake up and see and to realize, even though in many ways we find ourselves limited through the form of our bodies, there are very limited forms, our true nature is Dhamma, the deathless Nibbana, here and now, timeless. Wake up and see for yourself. Don't just believe these inspiring words. So then we think, my true nature is the deathless Nibbana, the Dhamma, ultimate reality, which is still grasping that when I say your true nature is the deathless reality of Dhamma, then it's not to create a sense of I am the Dhamma as a person, but to be the witness to all the phenomena that you experience through your senses and body. Whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, healthy, disease, male or female. So when it's always amazed me in my own insights into this path is that the Dhamma is apparent here and now. And then I can think, I am the Dhamma, I am pure. And then something within me says, no, you're not. That's ego trip. If I start thinking I'm the ultimate reality, it's a road to madness. Because grasping the idea that this body is ultimate reality, or this person, this personality is absolutely pure and perfect, because it's not. When you reflect on your own body, you realize how ephemeral it is and untrustworthy. That it changes, it gets sick, and growing up, we have to go through growing pains and we have to deal with sexual desires and our emotional sense of fear and anger that is a part of this life within this human form. This planet Earth that we live on is ephemeral. It's not a trustworthy, stable condition. As we can see with climate change, all the predictions for the future and references to prehistoric past of meteorites slamming into the earth and terrible earthquakes, tsunamis, atomic energy, the bombing of Hiroshima. That's scary, isn't it? Because we can destroy this planet, we can make it unlivable because of our intelligence, to create a weapon of mass destruction. It takes a level of intelligence, scientific knowledge to create such a menacing image. So then we can take a very negative view that it's all just impermanent, doesn't matter. But that's another view. Whatever we think is a viewpoint. It's taking a position, grasping an idea, an ideal, without realizing that all the ideals that we can create in our minds are phenomena. They're impermanent, they're sankharas, then they're unstable. So what is stability? What doesn't arise and cease, what is not created by human beings, invented by human beings or creatures, animals that think, is consciousness. So consciousness is where space can manifest. Try to imagine if there was not any consciousness, then there'd be no space. What makes us aware of space is consciousness. I've done a lot of meditations and contemplations on space, because you can actually perceive it, through seeing the space in this temple. The space in the new sala, big space. Or there's bigger spaces, arenas and theaters that are huge, enormous, athletic fields, big space. But these fields and temples and salas and that are in space. And it's a consciousness that allows us to perceive space, because consciousness is apparent here and now. It's not imagined. It's not an imagination. So I consider it the magic of the mystery of life. what is consciousness? Is it God? When we think of all the attempts to name ultimate reality, we come up with Krishna, Brahma, Allah, God. There's so many names, attempts to name what has no name, which is apparent here and now. And that's what the Buddhist teachings are pointing at, to wake up and realize this for yourself. Ehipassiko means come and see for yourself. It's an invitation, an encouragement to see for yourself. Don't just believe these words. Because if I'm just believing that I'm the pure universal consciousness as a person, that's madness. That's going into madness. But when I've been through reflecting on the nature of sankharas for 58 years now, I've not found any sankhara to be permanent. I've tested it out. I've doubted. I've examined everything, from all my thoughts, my emotions, my body, my senses, my ideals, my faults, my sins, my weaknesses are all sankharas. I've no doubt, because I've investigated this for myself. And when you realize this, then the insight into letting go is not a destruction, it's not annihilation, it's not nihilism. We call it the middle way, Majjhima Patipada, because it's not grasping ideals or trying to destroy everything, but in waking up to Dhamma, to ultimate reality, which is silent. It has no voice, has no language. It's silence that is peaceful and loving and non-judgmental. Because to judge things, to judge yourself or judge others, is always a grasping of you personally have a reaction you have to somebody else. So many people, monks, nuns, like to live alone, where they're not confronted with their relationships with others. So this idea of going off to a cave in the Himalayas, or I always had this a bamboo hut in the forest, in the jungles of Thailand, all by myself, where I completely alone. And I don't have to deal with the way I react to other monks or nuns or lay people. And so being alone is one way, and you can realize silence when you're alone. And then that creates this image that you have to be alone to be silent. And that I was told, I remember years ago before I ordained, when I was living in Bangkok, they said, you've got to stay in the forest your whole life and be alone, because as soon as you get into Bangkok, it's full of temptations, advertisements, attractive people, and on like that. So you can't meditate in Bangkok. You can't meditate in London. You have to find a cave in the Himalayas or a bamboo hut in the forest, or are the ideals of just being alone. But many people's karma is different. When they're alone, they get bored. Being alone can be very boring. Where living in Bangkok can be very exciting. London is a very interesting, beautiful city to look at, to experience. So these are, these obstacles to awakening. Can you write off Bangkok or London as just sensory indulgences? They can be. Or we hold the view that I've got to be alone. I want to be alone. I don't want to be with anyone else. I can't have a relationship with anyone. And these are feelings, emotions one can experience, but the witness is aware that that's all they are. They're empty phenomena. All this idea that I have to be alone to realize Nibbana, the realization is that that's my thinking habit, that's my karmic tendency. Because living with other people, it presents conflicts. Because we don't share the same karmas. You're not going to think like and agree with everything I say or believe. It's impossible unless you try to brainwash people, which happens where you kind of form a cult that worships you and agrees with everything you say, and continually, obsequiously believes that you're absolutely right, that is still a sankhara. Sankharas they change. All conditions are impermanent. And if the Nibbana is Dhamma is apparent here and now, then it can't be a thought or an emotion, an idea, an ideal. It can't be right or wrong. It's where right and wrong cease. Good and bad cease. And what's left is bliss or Nibbana. Or if these words are too strong, as peace or silence. So silence is, listening to various mystics and about the silence and seeking silence and praising silence, and silence is our refuge, and silence can be, the word itself is a phenomenon, it's a sankhara. But when you realize silence, as a person, it's boring. Ideals can be interesting, having high-minded thoughts about right and wrong, or about religion, about God, about Buddhism. That can be very interesting. But silence is not interesting. It's but apparent here and now, timeless, Come and see for yourself. Looking inward, Opanayika Dhamma, looking inward, and not seeking silence, expecting, to find it in a cave in the Himalayas or a bamboo hut in Thailand or in a temple or a church or a basilica or anywhere. You're not trying to find silence as some kind of permanent refuge for oneself as a person, but silence is apparent here and now. And this you must be realized individually through wisdom, through bhavana, through reflection on the way it is. And I remember when I spent 1 year before I met Luang Por Cha in a monastery in Nong Khai, where I was a samanera, and I experienced this silence. I had a very incredible insight. And the first 3 months when I was living alone in this hut, it wasn't a bamboo hut, it was a wooden hut, a kuti with a tin roof in a scrubby forest in this monastery in northeastern Thailand. And so the first 3 days when I was there, my upachaya, my preceptor, took me to live there, and nobody could speak English. And I couldn't speak Thai, and they spoke Laotian dialect. Nong Khai is right across the Mekong River from Laos. So the native tongue was Laotian. So I was there alone for a year. And the first 3 months, first 3 days was heaven. I thought, this is what I've always wanted, just to be alone. Just not have to relate to other people. I'd been through universities, I've been in the military, I've been through the Peace Corps, I've been married and divorced, and suddenly all I wanted was just to be alone without having to relate or justify anything. And in this kuti in Nong Khai, I was. They brought me 1 meal a day. I never said a word. And after the first 3 days of thinking, this is what I've always wanted, this reclusive life, silent, then I began to experience what I call my past karmic habits started arising when I tried to meditate by developing concentration on my breath. I'd just be overwhelmed with fear. And it wasn't that there was anything to be afraid of in the circumstances I was living in. It wasn't, it was fairly close to the town, and you could take a lot for granted about surviving. People, the monks, the Merchis there were all very supportive. I wasn't in conflict with anybody. I had no personal knowledge of anyone, but fear overwhelmed me, and anger and resentment. And I was 30 years old and 31 years old and been repressing these emotions most of my life. I was told that you shouldn't be angry, was a good Christian, and you've got to conquer anger and jealousy and fear. There are evil forces. And suddenly here I was in this place where all these evil forces were presenting themselves. And so I like this one of these pictures of the life of the Buddha where he's under the Bodhi tree and all the forces of Mara, pleasant and unpleasant, come and attack him. And that's what it felt like. I was just being attacked by anger, and not because of anyone or the situation I was in. The fear, well, there's nothing to fear. Nobody was making me angry. The food they were giving me was very nice, very wealthy woman in the town was supporting it, sending very delicious Chinese food every day. And I was alone. I only had one book, The Word of the Buddha, with me, which I give copies to all the monks and nuns. So I had to read that if I wanted to distract myself. And then after about 3 months of this attack by Mara, I suddenly woke up in this hut in a state of bliss. This ringing silence. And everything was beautiful. I was like in a palace. The kuti was a rough, coarse kind of wooden structure with a tin roof. I went to the bathroom, the toilet, which was very crude and unbeautiful, but it looked absolutely stunning. The forest around with scrubby trees looked like paradise. Everything was, I could not even imagine of anything to fear or to get angry about. There was no anger, no fear, no jealousy, no resentment. But at that time, I didn't know what had happened. I didn't have a teacher. So I thought, I just assumed I was enlightened. And so because I never experienced anything of that beauty or level of bliss, until I came in conflict with the immigration service in Nong Khai, and then it all completely collapsed. But it was, when I never spoke about this before, reflecting on it. I never even told Luang Por Cha when I met him, because I didn't know what had happened, and I assumed he'd think I was mad or crazy. So I kept it to myself for many years, many years. And then as I grew in understanding Dhamma, then I began to see that it was like a blessing. Suddenly I'd managed to release all these repressed fears and desires and resentments, because I didn't know what to do with them. For 3 months, what can you do? Even you can't meditate on the breath, you can't walk in Jongrom, just practicing formal meditation practices. I was just overwhelmed with these suppressed emotions. I had hallucinations, like going mad. And then, like the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree, not to compare myself with it, I could have left, many monks there were many monks came to this monastery who couldn't stand it and left after a few weeks. But I managed to sit through 3 months of absolute misery and hell, and then something changed, shifted. And so now I can interpret it as like all these repressed feelings, emotions, the way I was brought up. My parents were idealistic Christians. And they, so I was brought up to be very polite. My mother would teach my sister and I etiquette and good manners, and we were never allowed to use swear words. So I was, conditioned from early age into being a nice boy, a well-behaved boy, which got me through a lot of difficult situations in the world. There's a certain amount of worldly wisdom in being nice and good. But in the process, I'd managed to suppress. I had not really looked at the range of emotions and fears and self-consciousness and resentments that accumulate in a human lifespan. For 30 years, I managed to present this image of being nice. And even fooled myself. So then in this situation where suddenly being nice, there's nobody to be nice to, it wasn't just trying to sit there in a hut in Thailand trying to be nice because there was no reason to be, I wasn't relating to anybody. When the seminary came to bring the meal, then I was nice to him. So I didn't dump my anger or fears on any of the people around. The nuns would come and offer food and things like that. So I was nice to them. That's how I've been conditioned to be a nice guy. But in terms of actual experience, being alone, there was those Maras that attacked were not nice. They were scary, frightening, ugly, nasty, vulgar, dirty, and it's through somehow just staying there and observing it. I had no instruction to do that, but that's what I did, just intuitively. Stayed in this one spot, which was the kuti in Nong Khai, until all these Maras suddenly disappeared. So that I consider an awakening experience, because after that, when I went to the immigration office and was treated rudely, I tried to get back this state of bliss, and I couldn't do it. I tried all the techniques, by this time I learning to sit and just meditate and trying to get back this blissful state wasn't working. But there was a level of change in the realization after that experience where I realized that I needed to be disciplined, I needed a training, I needed to ordain as a bhikkhu. I couldn't live my life in a kuti in Nong Khai as a samanera and expect to survive that the rest of my life. So it was insight into I started taking interest in Vinaya, which I had no interest in before. All these precepts, I just dismissed them as unnecessary, like an arrogant intellectual would do. They're not inspiring. So then after that, I met a disciple of Luang Por Chah, who was a wandering monk, wandering in Nong Khai, and he could speak English. Suddenly after that, my life changed. I knew what I needed to do. I needed to take full ordination, train myself with the precepts. I needed to bow my head to a teacher. I needed to keep celibacy, rules of celibacy. I needed all this through the support of a community, which eventually this disciple of Ajahn Chah took me. I ordained in Nong Khai and went to stay my first months as a bhikkhu at Wat Pa Pong with Luang Por Chah. And then that gave me a form to survive in life. As an individual person, as a monk, I had a community around me. I had a teacher. And the support, the incredible support that the local people gave, providing me with meals and shelter and robes, medicine for illness. Suddenly this was like some great gift presented to me, which I didn't imagine, but this insight, I needed discipline, because I tended to be a very manipulative person by nature, trying to get things my own way and kind of righteous and conceited. And I realized that conceit was a sankhara. So then I trained with Luang Por Chah for many years, and that was the training that led me on to this moment here in the temple, to share this kind of opportunity that's made available to people in this country. Because European, Western values are basically sankharas. They're delusions of the mind, and that's why no matter how idealistic they are, they tend to break down. Like we see with democracy, the ideal that I was raised with was democracy was really the best. And we can see how people holding on to this view of democracy, when we see all kinds of authoritarian leaders rising in the world, and endless wars and conflicts. What happened to democracy? Are we going to lose it? When you look at the word itself, it's an ideal, it's a good perception, but it is a sankhara, so it's unstable. Its very nature is to change. But what doesn't change through 90 years of my life is consciousness, conscious awareness. And people ask, how are you, Luang Por? Well, I'm fine, because basically, consciousness is fine. It's not old. It's not 90 years old. it's not about good vision or hearing well and being vigorous and strong and healthy, because physically that can't happen anymore. I can't expect to find youth and vigor and all that. The images of youth are past. But what's left is consciousness which hasn't changed. But I didn't realize consciousness was my real home, my refuge, until I awakened mainly through developing awareness around the nature of the body and the senses, through guidance of the Four Noble Truths, through surrendering myself to the limitations of the Vinaya, the discipline, the precepts that are part of this tradition. And some of the precepts make no sense anymore. They created in India 2,560 years ago. But still, it doesn't matter. I used to be critical of the Patimokkha chanting. You sit there for 45, 50, 60 minutes listening to someone reciting in Pali 227 precepts. And my American conditioning, was very critical of it. But I used it as a way of being aware of, me and my conditioning. Having formed, it was not asking me to do anything bad or or evil. But it seemed about reciting 227 rules every fortnight. How an American mind conditioned to think differently, could see all kinds of, is this necessary? Is this reasonable? And after all these years, 57, 58 years, I realized the importance of it, of the community of bhikkhus collecting together every fortnight to this ceremony of reciting the Patimokkha keeps the community together. Otherwise, we're too apt to go off on our own views and opinions. We have nothing to hold us together as a community that can relate its history back to 2,560 some years, because of just the Vinaya kind of holds the whole thing together with this common commitment to the discipline of that particular tradition. So in this tradition, I'm really grateful to it, for Theravada, for the Thai forest monastery, Luang Por Sumedho, my preceptor. I feel nothing but gratitude, because it's something that I didn't create. It's not like my ideal, fit my ideal of what I would create if I would create a Sangha or a religion of any sort. Because it's pointing to Dhamma the way it is. All conditions are impermanent. I have no doubt about that anymore. All Dhamma is not personal. So I've seen through how I create myself as a person. I'm a senior monk. I have a title. I'm 90 years old. I've got all these titles names, but they're all sankharas. Not grasping any of them. They function on a conventional level, but ultimately there's no longer any reason to hold, to grasp, to identify with anything at all in the samsara or the worldly life that we experience through these forms. So I offer this as a reflection for this afternoon.